Hello everybody and welcome to Macro Talk 2, which is something we do on Thursdays at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I have no idea what date it is. Well, now I do. It's August the 21st of 2020 something. It's been a hectic week indeed. Today we're picking up where we left off, sort of, at the beginning of the week. The idea this week was to talk about both ends of the lens issue. When selecting lenses and using lenses, you have to be thinking about things like aberrations on one end of the lens and diffraction, softening on the other. And we talked a lot about diffraction on Tuesday. Today we're going to talk about aberrations, and we're going to get into some specifics. We're going to talk about lenses, actually, specific lenses, among other things. We'll be talking about some of these ones here, and I'll be pointing out to you which ones are particularly good at certain things, and the ones you might want to lust after. Doesn't mean you'll be able to buy them, but you can think about it. So that's coming up today. On Saturday we have an after stack. I believe the plan is that we're going to talk about updates and new features in Photoshop and other editing programs, but that's really up to you. It's your discussion. Anybody, of course, can bring photographs, and if you bring photographs, that trumps everything else that we had on the schedule, because we're going to work on them first. So if you're interested in macro photography post-production, the stuff you do in Photoshop and Lightroom and Capture One and all that, this is the thing you need to come to. It costs a lot. It's expensive. It's actually free. You don't have to pay anything to come. Everybody is welcome. The invitation is over on my website, on the most recent blog. You can also find it in the blog that is posted on Discord. So there are invitations floating all around, and you are welcome. This is something that Bud Parrott and I do, and it's usually a lot of fun. 10 o'clock on Saturday morning until 12 o'clock, or 11:30, 12 o'clock. Whenever we run out of things to talk about, we'll stop. Okay? The competition is ongoing. I was going to try to talk a little bit about ideas for microhabitats on Tuesday. Never got around to it. I doubt I'll get around to it today. Got a lot of stuff to cover. But yeah, if you want ideas on that, I can certainly give you them. We're running out of time. 21st, that means there are what? A week and a half, something like that, almost 2 weeks left before the end of the competition. And it's a difficult one. Making the microhabitat the star of your picture, it's going to be challenging, but I have a feeling that you guys will be up to it. All right, nothing else to announce right now, I don't think. If you want, if you enjoy any of the stuff that I do, whether it's live streams or videos or competitions or any of the things that the channel does, and you want me to be able to keep doing it, it would be super if you would join Patreon. It's a thing where you give Patreon a bit of money, they give me some of it, and that's it. It's a one-sided deal. You give me money is basically what it amounts to. It's not complicated, but it allows me to keep doing what I'm doing, because otherwise I don't have any money to do it. So that's the plan. And if you're interested, go over to Patreon, www.patreon.com/Alan Walls Photography, and there'll be a page there that will tell you all about it. You get all kinds of benefits from being over there. Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. Okay, so aberrations. We talked about diffraction on Tuesday. Diffraction is a physical phenomenon related to the size of the aperture in your lens. When light passes through an aperture of any size, it can be f/0.9, it doesn't matter how big it is, it's going to diffract the light to a greater or lesser extent. But as the aperture gets smaller and smaller, it results in a blob of light hitting your sensor that for each individual point source that's coming into the lens, that gets bigger and bigger. And the bigger that blob of light is, the more pixels it covers, and the less useful it is for revealing detail in your subject. That's all it is. So if your aperture is too small, your picture goes soft everywhere, the whole thing, from corner to corner. And that's called diffraction softening. It ruins more pictures than just about anything else in macro photography, because I think we forget that f/22 is a diffraction kind of territory. Today we're talking, though, about the other half of the lens. It's not really the other half, you know what I'm saying. The part that is controlled by the folks that design the lenses, and that is the lens construction itself, and how it not only impacts the impact of diffraction, impacts the impact. That's a very strange use of words. I don't think my LLM would approve of that. But anyway, the point is that the way the lens is constructed is not only going to have an effect on how big your airy disk is when it eventually gets to the sensor, but it's going to affect how every pixel gathers data from the world around you. We're talking about the ways in which lens manufacture can fall short of the perfect lens. The perfect lens, of course, doesn't exist, though there are one or two that probably get jolly close. And there are lots that are very good, that are very well corrected. That means they are correcting for the things that cheap lenses do to light that we don't want in our pictures. That's what aberrations are, the things that cheap lenses do to our light. And I'm going to talk about pretty much all of them and give you some insight into the lenses that are better with that kind of correction and those that are not, and give you some practical advice on how to avoid walking into this trap. I have a lens on my desk which is, I think, the worst lens for a camera that I've ever used. It's truly shocking, and I'll show that to you in a little bit. Maybe you could guess what it is and write it in the chat. It'd be interesting to see what you think. But it really is. I think it has lenses that are designed to exaggerate aberrations as a teaching aid. It could be, and in which case I'd give it higher points. But I'll show you that, and I'll also show you what I believe are today both photography realm that you can buy. There are better lenses, but they're reserved for industry and special cases. We'll talk about them as well. So we talked on Tuesday about the whole Scylla and Charybdis thing, and I apologized for coming up with that title. So I'm not going to go through the story again. You either know it or you don't. If you're into Greek mythology, you do. And understand this as we start out, that every macro lens, including all my favorites, like this gorgeous thing, all macro lenses, and this is not actually a macro lens, it's a repo lens, an enlarger lens, all macro lenses are flawed. Like all lenses are flawed, but when you take a macro lens, those flaws get magnified along with everything else. So a macro lens, more than any other, I believe, is either going to shine with its brilliance in terms of design, or it is going to show you every misstep in its building. And there are some lenses here I'm going to show you that are glowing examples of how good a lens can be in macro. Why is it macro lenses that get so brutalized by these aberrations? Well, the oftentimes aberrations will go unnoticed when your reproduction ratio is way less than 1:1. Because they kind of get, I guess our eyes are used to glossing over things that aren't consistent with what we see in the real world. So photographs that have some aberrations in them tend to not be very glaring. That just isn't the case with macro lenses. It seems to really, at 1:1 and above, whatever is going on optically becomes really, really obvious. The key offenders in macro, by the way, are chromatic aberrations, which we'll talk about, and field curvature. They're the two. Every other aberration will impact our photographs, but they're the two biggies. And it's one of the reasons we search for and pay excellent money for lenses that directly address those issues. Let me show you a map kind of thing. No, map's a good word for it, if I can find it. I call it an aberration map, and it is basically how flaws, and that's flaws with a W, not flaws with an O and a U, how flaws show up on flat subjects. Let me show you what I mean, what I'm talking about. I've covered up my thingamajig that shows me what screen I'm on. My bad. There we are. So if you take a coin or a disc of some kind and photograph it, there are going to be, and you do it with a nice bad lens, the kind of problems you're going to see are chromatic aberration, like we talked about. In this case, color fringing. It can be a couple of different types, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Spherical aberration, where you get some softening and glowy, kind of soft-edged structures in your photograph. Distortion at the edges, be it curving in or curving out. Field curvature, which manifests as edges that are soft in a picture that's otherwise fairly sharp. And weird things like astigmatism and coma, which are stretched out blurry parts of a photograph. And I'm going to attempt to show you examples of all of these as we go through and we talk about aberration types. But let me tell you something. I have been taking pictures for a long time, and I take most of them with glass that is very good indeed at controlling aberrations. And then I'm very quick to throw out pictures that have a lot of aberrations in them. And over time, I've accumulated rather a large library of pictures that don't have a tremendous amount of aberration showing in them. And then when you're going to give a talk on aberrations and you have to find examples of it, do you know how long that takes to go through every photograph looking for good examples of... So I'm saying that because my examples aren't particularly good. That you have to use your imagination to see what I'm talking about. But there you go. That's the way it is sometimes. So we'll talk about the most common aberrations first, what they come from, how we can fix them, how lens design can address them. And they are, starting with spherical aberration, the most common. So spherical aberration is where you're using a lens that is fairly spherical. And a spherical lens has a geometry such that light that passes through the center portion of the lens will be focused on a plane, hopefully the plane of your sensor when you're in focus. However, the light on the edges, the lights passing through the edges of this spherical lens will be bent in more acutely so that they cross or they come into focus before the sensor. You hearing what I'm saying? Spherical lenses, some of the light from the edges gets focused in front of where you want it. The result is, of course, that part of the picture is kind of blurry and spread out. And it's spread out more than the nice, sharp, central part of the image. So what you end up with is a halo of soft blurriness around your subject. That is spherical aberration, and it's terribly common in cheaper lenses. Most lenses kind of get around it by using aspherical elements in the lenses, and indeed all modern macro lenses address that primarily with very aggressively using non-spherical or aspherical lenses specifically to cancel out that impact. And some lenses, the more expensive ones and some of the industrial ones, will use floating elements that can move. I believe one of the the micro Nikkor 200mm f4 has floating elements in it that are very effectively correct for spherical aberration as you change focus. So it's a very important concept to understand. I hope that none of your macro lenses are still prone to that. Some of the older ones, even some of the good older ones, still are. Well, they always will be because the lens isn't changing. The 55mm micro Nikkor, this is a very old one. This is a little prone to spherical aberration because it doesn't have those same aspherical elements that modern lenses do. So that's the first one. If you see structures, subjects in your image that seem to have a glowy halo around them and are looking a tad soft, you're probably dealing with an older lens that has some spherical aberration. The big one we all talk about, of course, is chromatic aberration, which is just another issue where the light is being treated differently by different parts of lenses. And what it effectively is doing is separating the wavelengths of light so that they don't appear in one spot where they're focused, but they appear either as a stack of colors before in the image plane and beyond. Imagine that your red, green, and blue light was in fact being focused somewhat in front of the sensor, on the sensor, and behind the sensor. The fuzzy areas of the before and the after, which would be the red and the blue, would show up as fringes because they would overlap with the green part, which is actually focused on the sensor. That is called longitudinal chromatic aberration, and it causes the red and blue to be focused on different planes but in the same spot, and the result is you get magenta halos and greenish halos around the subject. I've got one. I actually found one. Let me see if I can locate it. This was, fortunately, I have a file where I put all of the photographs that I take with lenses that I'm testing. And some of the lenses I've tested have been real stinkers. And it turns out those files have yielded some good examples. So let me see if I can find it. I know I can because, yeah, I just put them in this folder. So this is an example of longitudinal chromatic aberration in a picture of a moon. You know what that is? Taken in front of a plane, behind a plane. Where is it? There. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. That's it. So these have not been edited. They haven't been touched. I just pulled them right out of the file. And this was an aeroplane sitting on the ground, and behind it was a moon. And I was looking for an example of, I can't seem to make it zoom in, looking for an example of longitudinal chromatic aberration. And if you use your imagination, there we go, you can see the fringing around the moon, because it's a nice contrasty subject and don't laugh at the photograph. I know it's a pants photograph, but it does show this aberration rather well. That is classic of longitudinal or axial chromatic aberration. The other kind you're probably more familiar with, if I can find that example too, it would be great, is lateral or transverse chromatic aberration. And this is again a raw picture just taken straight out of my file from when I went up to Wisconsin, I think it is, last year, and was coming back and stopped to photograph the Mississippi in a few places. And you shouldn't be seeing these. This is like seeing me before I have my hair done in the morning. It would just appall you. But if you look at the edges where lateral or transverse chromatic aberration is going to be most obvious, if you look at areas of high contrast, let me try to do that again, areas of high contrast at the edges of the image, let's pick these poles here, and we're in at like 300% or something, and this is a JPEG of it. You can, well, heck, it showed up much better. There you go. You can start to see color fringing in the high contrast vertical lines at the periphery of the image. Not a good example, is it? I should have shown you the raw image where it was much more obvious and much less pixelated, but that's the idea. You look at the edges of the picture, you're not going to have a lot of transverse or lateral chromatic aberration in the middle of the picture, because that light has not been subjected to the different degrees of bending that result in the chromatic aberration. Let's see if there's any better stuff over here. Nope, Well, yes, there is. You can begin to see it. So anyway, it exists and it's real. Um, when you have high contrast, straight liney subjects, uh, of a darker subject with a brighter background, it can get pretty horrible. And I'm sure that everybody has seen their fair share of chromatic aberration. But that is what it is. And in macro, it is about as critical as an issue gets, because the the tiny details that we're interested in kind of magnify the fringing. The fringing is a result of the aberration. It's not a function of the size of the subject. Tiny subjects don't have tiny fringes. So when we're really zoomed in, really magnified in tight, and we're looking at small things, especially high contrast, you'll see the fringes so obviously. They're pretty shocking. So what do we do about them? How are chromatic aberrations fixed in lenses like this spectacularly wonderful, inexpensive Nikon DX lens at 85mm f3.5? It's not a terribly expensive lens, but it has fantastic color correction. Well, usually the fix is to use special pairings of lenses. Did you know that the lenses that they pair together to correct this aberration in camera lenses is made of two different types of glass that have slightly different indices of refraction? It's the glass itself is different. It's called crown glass and flint glass, and they actually make the lenses out of a pairing of crown and flint glass, which I thought was very interesting. That's what an achromat is, which is different from an acrobat, which is somebody who bounces around on a trampoline. This is a pair of lenses, and achromats are very good at correcting the fringing that we see in the reds and the blues. They don't do very much for the changes that you see in the middle part of the spectrum in the greens. If you want that, you need to add an additional element, and we're going to talk about that when we get to microscope objectives. But that's what an apochromatic lens is. It's a lens that has additional elements, so not only is it correcting for that uneven spreading out of the reds and blues, but it also corrects for the uneven spreading out of the greens, basically covering the whole spectrum. And APO lenses and lenses with APO type performance characteristics, like this fantastic lens that everybody is loving, the 90mm Laowa, which is just about as close to apochromatic as you can get in a camera lens these days. Fantastic. Other things like extra low dispersion glass or fluorite glass. There are glasses that have a performance that prevents the colors from being separated quite as much. Don't ask me how, way above my pay grade. But anyway, just think of it this way, that if your lens is separating the colors out like a rainbow, then it hasn't been designed as well as it could, because most of these things can be designed out with things like we were talking about, achromats, apochromats, good glass, all kinds of ways to do it. So let's talk for a minute about a completely different kind of aberration. This one's called astigmatism. Probably more commonly thought of in terms of eyesight or bad eyesight. Astigmatism, it's from the Latin, I believe, for a, which means without, and stigma, which means point. It's kind of like this talk. It's without point, and that's what astigmatism is. It means that the image that would normally be, or ideally be, projected onto a single spot or point on your sensor is in fact delivered as a streak instead of a spot. That's the best way to describe it. And the different focal planes tend to have that streak moving from horizontal to vertical. Imagine this. If you have a blurry area from astigmatism on the periphery of one of your photographs, and you're racking focus forwards and backwards, and the blurriness seems to change orientations from up and down to side, that's astigmatism. That's it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like nothing but astigmatism. And when you see that, you know that there is something in your lens that could have been fixed but wasn't. The result is on any given photograph, depending on where you're focused, that is going to show up as a blob or a streak one way or a streak the other way. Either way, it shows up in highlights that are off axis, especially in insect shots and coin shots. So when things get to looking streaky and weird, that's very much what it could be. The fix for it has always been and still is a lens element or a lens grouping called a double Gauss. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, a double Gauss is two Gausses, like this. You don't know what a single Gauss is? That's half of a double Gauss. It's where you take, well, let me just show you the picture. It'll be a lot easier than trying to explain it in words. Either side of the aperture, it's where you have some of this crown glass and flint glass sandwiched with the opposite on the other side. Amazingly, this thing's been around since it was invented by, believe it or not, a guy named Gauss. And it is that same Gauss, by the way, magnetic fellow. So what this does is it cancels out the effects, and you tend not to see astigmatism in lenses that are so treated with one of these elements. I had some ray diagrams that I made of light going through these, and frankly, it looked more like a recipe for some kind of Italian layered sandwich than it did a ray diagram. So let's move on to the next one. Astigmatism, blurry crosses. Think that way. The next one is coma, not the kind of coma that you get in after eating too much fast food. It's the coma that is a comet-like streak, most often seen at the edges of photographs of the sky with stars floating around in it. This would be something Julie would be an expert at, and maybe we could get her to show us some pictures of it if she's ever photographed it. I did find, I think, one picture that I was convinced could be called coma. Did I? No, I didn't. No, I'm sorry, I didn't. I found one with astigmatism, though. I'll show you that one instead, and we'll pretend it's coma. I was taking a picture of a... Did I not even fail to show you the lens thing? I did show you that, didn't I? Yes, I must have done. So this is my example of astigmatism that I finally found. It's right down here in the corner. See these blurry stars? Some of them are just in one orientation, some of them are perpendicular to that, and some of them have both. But that actually is an example of astigmatism. Coma would be if you had the blob with a tail coming off, usually pointing back towards the subject. Coma meaning like a comet, which sounds like a song by the Bangles from the 1970s. But yeah, there you go. That is what it looks like, and in star pictures against a black sky, it's probably even more impressive. I'm pretty impressed that I found that particular example after looking everywhere else. I don't have a picture of coma, but it's, if you see seagulls flying in deep space, they're probably not seagulls. It's probably coma from your lens. Fair enough. Anything with streaky tails on it, anything like that. Bright specular highlights like dewdrops, sometimes insect eyes, that type of thing can smear laterally in one direction. That would be a result of coma. You just see the if it looks like a comet flying across your image, that's what it is. And yeah, the fix is usually to use aspherics, like we were talking about for the other geometric the other issue with what am I trying to say? The spherical aberration. Spherical, it's not that difficult a word. It uses the same aspherical elements, will take care of Coma. So another kind of aberration that we'll see that's important in macro photography is field curvature. Field curvature is where the image is not projected onto a flat surface, because believe it or not, your sensor is a perfectly flat surface. If the image is in fact projected in such a way that the plane of focus forms more of a dish shape, then you can see that where it might be sharply focused in the middle, but as you get towards the edges, you're on the upsides of the bowl, and they won't be as in focus. So when the field is curved, and unless you're shooting on a specially curved sensor to match your field curvature from your lens, you'll end up with soft corners with a sharp center. Something we see quite a lot in the lenses we cobble together to use on macro platforms, because this is a problem that is not easy to fix, and yeah, the lenses that fix it the best are more expensive, certainly more expensive. But anyway, the focal plane shifts on the curve as you get out towards the edges, and it has a huge impact in macro photography, especially if the problem is fairly significant. You can't crop inside of it. That would be one way to get around it, I suppose, would be to cut out the curvy bits that are soft. But you'd much rather have your whole picture sharp, right? Well, the way you do that, the way you get the whole picture sharp to the edges, is to use lenses that are corrected completely for field curvature, that are able to project an entirely flat image onto the sensor. What else would you want to be able to do that with? If you were making copies of negatives, for example, and shining light through a negative down onto a piece of film, you would want that to be flat, right? Because your film is completely flat, otherwise your picture would not print sharp. That's why they came up with these lenses. Enlarger lenses are particularly well corrected for field curvature, so that they produce an image. When they're reversed and used for macro photography, your small image is projected large on the sensor but completely flat. That's why I love these things so much. They are particularly good. So are holy grail lenses like the printing Nikors, the enlarger lenses like the APO Rodagon. There are relatively few camera lenses that are known for their flatness of field, but I am going to show you one of them because I happen to have it on my desk, and that is this sweet lens right here. This is the Micro Nikkor 200mm f4. This is a profoundly well corrected lens for field curvature, because it has a floating element design in there that compensates as you focus. This is a flat lens. This is a flat lens, a very flat lens. This unfortunately is not as much, and this is as unflat as you can possibly get. But I'll talk about that in just a minute. So better lenses tend to be better constructed for this problem, and it's worth looking at. How do you diagnose it? Photograph a piece of graph paper something that you could ask me for, because I always have a sheet of graph paper. If you photograph that from some kind of a fixed stand from your tripod, and you're flat to the surface, it'll show you a bunch of stuff about the geometry of your lens. Look for softness at the corners. We're also going to talk about distortion, which is where the lens not only can a lens bend the focal plane, but it can distort the vertical and horizontal lines on a plane. You've probably seen how when you're using a wide-angle lens, for example, and you get up in somebody's face and take a picture, they have an enormous nose. That is one example of how a lens distorts reality, and sometimes it happens in lenses that are not actually that particularly wide angle. Let me show you a couple of examples of these types of distortion. There are two types we commonly talk about. One is barrel distortion, which is the one I just referenced, and this is actually a picture from the same walking around with a new lens thing that I did a couple of years ago, so you might recognize the location. If I can just find there it is. So it's not exactly subtle, but what you can see here is look at the vertical uprights of the windows, and you can see that they are bowing out. It's because the lens had significant barrel distortion, and it's actually making this rectangular window look more like, well, a barrel. How about that? I've got one that shows the opposite too, which is where instead of the image bulging out in the center, it pokes in at the center. It's kind of the opposite of this. That's called pincushion distortion, and I found one of those as well. Yeah, this is actually not a bad example of pincushion. It's a sheet of LEDs. I used it in a talk, so it was supposed to be out of focus, except at the front bit. But it's a sheet of LEDs on a light panel, and if you look carefully, you can see that not only are the vertical lines kind of bowed in towards the center, but so are the horizontal lines, making the whole thing feel as if it's bending in towards the middle. Like, I guess that's what a pincushion does. I'm not sure I've ever seen a pincushion. I'm not sure I would want one. Why you would want a cushion made out of pins, I don't know, but presumably that's what they look like. So that is the barrel and pincushion, the geometric distortions that we see. They become really, really problematic and obvious if you're photographing, like I do, microchips, circuit boards, any flat subjects. Coin photographers don't like having this stuff. And it's very, very noticeable. It's noticeable when you're photographing artwork too, especially artwork with geometry in it. But you don't want these bending in or bending out lines. The way you deal with it, either on the front end or the back end. The front end would be you throw away your $15 macro lens and buy something that is flat field. A good macro lens that is well corrected, or you learn how to use Photoshop or Lightroom, because you can correct this abnormality in most editing programs really quickly. I mean, it's a very easy thing to do. You just apply a filter. There's a slider for it, and that's all there is to it. So one thing that may have occurred to you, or will have occurred to you in the past, is, as with everything else in photography, it's not quite as clean cut as it sounds. When you're dealing with aberrations, you are frequently dealing with aberrations that occur in clusters, and generally happens is when you fix one aberration, you can make other ones worse. And there are a few pairings that are particularly bad. Chromatic aberration and spherical aberration can be problematic. When you use APO lenses, APO elements, you can actually introduce halo to the halo blur from spherical aberration while correcting chromatic aberration. Correcting astigmatism can cause the whole curvature of the field. So your astigmatism goes away, but you end up with soft corners from blurring everything. And Coma, when you fix that by placing a stop in front of the aperture or behind, you end up with sometimes other geometric distortions like pincushion or barrel, because you're changing the geometry to get rid of one and you're introducing the other. It's like tuning a piano. Have you ever tuned a piano? You haven't? Well, go home and tune a piano later on today. You'll discover that I've never tuned a piano. I've never even watched one tune, but I understand that as you tighten up one string, it causes some of the others to go wonky on you. So you're constantly chasing after getting them all right. And that's much what it is with aberrations, which is why we like to leave it to the experts to do. And this is a lens design thing. The best lenses, the ridiculously expensive, impossible to find printing Nikors, for example, in their various different sizes. What are they? 95 millimeters and 110 and 150, something like that. 75, 90, 150. Yeah, there are 3 printing Nikors that are actually. Why do you know why they're called printing Nikors? They're actually designed and are still used. Not in printing, but in lithography, in making super accurate traces on silicone substrates for lithography is the way they make dyes, computer dyes. It's complicated, but these lenses have to be absolutely without faults, otherwise they'll put your wires in the wrong place when they're making a computer chip, and that would be a disaster. So that's what they're used in. That's why they're called printing Nikors. Because my friend Mike Canfer has one of these lenses, and so does Bud Perrott, both of whom are knowledgeable about moving pictures and things like that, I thought it was printing in the movie industry, and I've said that before. And I know that they were used for that, to make prints of movie negatives, but apparently they were named for lithography. Now you know. So which are the most dominant aberrations in macro photography, the ones that we care about most? Chromatic aberration and field curvature, no doubt about it. Secondary, coma and astigmatism, kind of two sides of the same coin. Spherical aberration when you get to 1-to-1. Distortion is usually negligible, but it becomes super important if you're photographing flat geometries and where any curvature becomes really obvious. So bear those things in mind. These are the aberrations that you're paying to have corrected when you buy a $1,000 macro lens instead of a $100 macro lens. I can pretty much guarantee you that if any of the aberrations have been corrected on a $100 macro lens, it was done by accident, not on purpose. What then are the very best of the best when it comes to aberration control in macro lenses? And you understand, let me just say before I give you these lens names, that having a lens that is supremely well corrected for aberrations does not preclude you from taking rubbishy shots with it. If, for example, you were to be overly aggressive with the use of the iris, the diaphragm, and you were to close the lens down and suddenly find yourself with a lens that is diffraction limited, but you're introducing diffraction because of your choices in using too tight an aperture. So there are two areas of danger in any lens, even the very good ones. So the lenses that are most prized for having most effectively corrected and this is of course somewhat subjective, but I'm sure that everybody's going to have their own opinion on this. But right about the top of the list is this lens, the Micro Nikkor 200mm f4 IF ED. That's the extra dispersion element that we are talking about. And this lens is really, really, really well corrected throughout its range. It takes pictures that are very free of chromatic aberration, field curvature, the things that we don't want to see. The Canon 100mm f2.8L, the macro IS, that is a particularly well-corrected lens as well, and very popular with Canon shooters. Most serious Canon owners who do macro photography will have that lens in their collection. Sony users will like the Sony FE 90mm f2.8G OSS. That is a very well-corrected lens as well. One that may surprise you, and there was a lot of back and forth on this when it was released, but one of the best modern macro lenses for a control of aberrations is mine, the MC105 f2.8S. This is the Nikon macro lens that replaced the old 105. This is an incredibly well corrected lens, and it got a lot of flack when it first came out for a lot of different reasons we won't talk about now, but its corrections are amazing. At the time of its release, this is before the good 105 came out, these lenses were okay. The 105 f2.8, the D lenses, I like them because of the manual aperture ring and everything, but they aren't nearly as well corrected as the version that followed this, and versions that will follow it in the future. I already told you about the 85, the Nikon 85 f3.5. You wouldn't think from looking at the specs that an f3.5G DX lens it's not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than the others. $400 or $500 used, 600 new. This lens is incredibly sharp. It has a lot of letters after its name, and I'm not sure what they all mean, but it's well corrected given the price of it. I'm sure that you want to know what this other lens is, so I'll show it to you. I shouldn't say the name of it out loud. I don't think I can actually pronounce the name of it out loud, but I'll give it a try. I think it's the Zongi. I don't think they write it on the lens itself for fear that people would recognize it. But this is the Zongi lens with the very popular and helpful triangular aperture. That strikes me as a bad idea for an aperture shape, but there you go. They did not consult me about this. This lens has the worst chromatic aberration, the worst field curvature, Coma, Astigmatism, everything. If you just want to experience lens aberrations, spend the $10 and buy one of these, and you'll be thrilled that you did. So The specialist type lenses that are super well corrected. I've already talked about the printing Nikkors, but also the Rodenstock Apo Rodagon D. They're very expensive. I think it's $800 for an enlarger lens, but boy, they're great. And of course, the one we all know and love are the microscope objectives, the Mitutoyo M-Plan APO objectives. Those aperchromats are exquisitely well corrected. They do have a tiny bit of fringing when you push them, but by and large, they are as corrected as we as photographers are likely to ever see. And for the price, they are an amazing deal. So it's pretty hard to beat any lens that is truly apochromatic and flat field. That's all there is to it. This beautiful lens, my EL Nikkor 50 2.8N, is actually not an apochromat. In fact, it costs a fraction of what one of those would, but it has very little fringing, so it's beautiful. What about the other weak performers? I don't want to leave this thing floating out there all on its own. There are plenty of older 50 and 55 millimeter macros, especially the f3.5 ones that have a smaller maximum aperture, and usually the ones that had 1 to 2 magnification. So the ones that were half life size. Every camera maker made one. Nikon made several of them. They tend to have a pretty large degree of chromatic aberration and soft corners. There's no getting around it. In the 80s and 90s, a lot of budget third-party companies were making and selling macro-type lenses like Vivitar and Cosina and other everyday names. And some of these, I bought several of these lenses. When I find them, I buy them because they usually are at the thrift shop and they usually cost $2 or $3, and they are just terrible in every way. Some of the fast pseudo macros that you'll see, the f2 and f1.7 lenses that call themselves macros, but they're not. They're super fast. They tend to have a lot of spherical aberration, a lot of blurring from that, and I'm deliberately leaving the rather lovely Leiwa wide-angle macro lens out of this discussion because I don't know exactly how to describe its aberrations. Most of them are expected. Well, I'm not gonna do that. I'll treat that as a separate case. We'll talk about it again later. I'm still not sure where I stand on it. But any time you see a macro zoom, and you'll see them from time to time, 70 to 200 millimeter lenses and kit zooms that have a switch on them that says macro, you do know that's a kind of a joke. No, you don't? Okay. Well, don't buy a kit lens that's a zoom that has a switch that says macro on it, because you end up with distortion, chromatic aberrations, and just mushy pictures. They're terrible. If a lens is made as a telephoto zoom lens, it probably doesn't have a usable macro setting on it. So, your fault. So many of these lenses, admittedly, were never actually macro lenses, really. They were called macro lenses, but just never made it in. They were pretenders. That's like my car. Should we talk about my car? We don't really have time. My car has a badge on it that was put on by the dealer, but not by the dealer, by the manufacturer, that leads you to believe that it is a certain type of that car, an M type of that car, but it's not. So why'd they put the badge on it? It's misleading, and that's what a lot of these lenses did when they slapped macro on them. So anyway, there's your legends, there's your pretenders. Do you have a legend I didn't mention? By all means. And let me hasten to add that many of these lenses, many of these manual Laowa lenses that are hugely popular with serious macro photographers, are incredible performers. They really, really do. This one in particular, the 90mm, that is, everybody raves about this lens. It does perform like an apochromat. It really does. It has very little color fringing, very little distortion. It is a good lens, and it's 2-to-1. So it's the real McCoy. It's a super macro lens. But I included that just so that nobody thought I was bashing on Chinese lenses. These are both Chinese lenses. The good, the bad, and the ugly. This is the bad and the ugly right there. Okay. Are we going to talk about MTF curves? I don't think we are, because MTF curves are graphs that you can look at, and in a glance for your camera and your lens, you can see how does it perform. Is it limited by aberrations, or is it limited by diffraction? That's all it tells you. And if you we'll look at them when we've got more time to actually go over them carefully, because there are a few quirky things you need to know about the modular transfer function to make really good sense of everything that shows up on one of these. I'll put it up just so that you can look at it while I'm closing things out. But this is the thing in a nutshell. Modulation means contrast in this sense, and the transfer function is how well can contrast be transmitted from your camera's through the lens to your sensor. How well can it record the existing contrast, which is what the spatial frequency at the bottom is. It's the number of pairs of lines per millimeter that the camera is able to differentiate as being individual pairs. And some lenses are perform really, really well somewhere in the middle, whereas when they're wide open, they're limited by aberrations, and when they're stopped down to little holes of nothing, they're limited by diffraction. And this graph basically says it all, but we'll talk about it another time because we're out of time today. From a purely practical standpoint, this is if you don't want to look at graphs, if you're allergic to graphs, for example, as many of you are, and the word Nyquist causes you to break out in hives, as it does me, then all you really need to know is most lenses are going to have the least aberrations, a stop and a half, or 2 stops, more closed than their maximum aperture. f5.6, f8, in that area. That is usually, for a macro lens, going to be the sweet spot. If you are photographing anything that's flat, invest in a lens that is known to have brilliant flat field correction, like the 200 or the 100L from Canon, or the MC105. And if you're doing work in the studio, an enlarger lens for $50 will do that. So if you remember those two things, if you have a choice between an apochromat and an achromat, if you see the letters APO on the lens and it's a reputable company, that's going to be better than any other lens of its in its class for color correction. Don't be fooled by lenses that say macro and zoom on the same lens body. They're lying about one of them. And basically, if you're more than 3x, put the lens away, go get a microscope objective and use them for everything else. You won't be able to beat the resolution and correction in a microscope objective, which is why they're so expensive. Remember that diffraction is physics, aberrations are by design, and every lens finds its home somewhere in between the two, having a window in the middle where you have minimal impact of aberrations, minimal impact of diffraction, the best possible picture that you can take. We didn't even talk about, well, how does that compare to the ability of your sensor to capture that higher resolution data? We'll talk about that another time too, because it's an interesting subject. I have done, as usual, talked for the entire time so that I haven't had a chance to look at who's here or what they're talking about, but seeing as everybody's already gone home, it's a bit too late. But I will read all of your messages as soon as I find the button to get to them. There it is. That's not it. There it is. Yes. Let me see. Waving from Art. Joseph says the term apochromatic is obsolete. Right. Okay. Well, I knew that that somehow the contentious use of the word apochromatic would get me in trouble today. But Graham, good to have you here. Hope the weather's nice over yonder. And let me see. Magiro, yeah, I should have mentioned that. That is a lens that I would absolutely love to get my hands on. The Magiro Jenison 95. That's a float lens. Anyway, beautiful, beautiful lenses. David Brown is here. Nick is here. Nick, because it has M Sport seats, is not good enough. That's not good enough to have that badge on there, so people say, "Wow, I didn't know they made an M740." So now you know. Julie, great pleasure to meet you the other day. So kind of you to come by the studio. I look forward to talking further in the future. The Leua 25 has a bit of a loca problem, but it's mostly manageable. That was indeed my opinion of it as well. The Zeiss 100mm f2 is an ultra-fast macro, so is the 28 f1.9 ultra micro Nikkor. Yes, yes, yes. Demetrius, hi. There's a fair bit of back and forth going on there. Let me see. Just Me is here, or was here. Glad you came. Nick is now on medication because I used the word Canon. There you go. You never know. You never know. This is an old dog learning a new trick. So anyway, I believe Susan is here. Welcome, Susan. There was a lot of chat going on today, which is always good when you guys are chatting. There's productive things happening out there. Robert, glad you made it. And for any of you that I did not say hi to, like Susan and UAE, and Ingolf is here as well. Ingolf, I'm glad I saw your name there at the top. We are done. I am out of time. The weekend is just around the corner. I have a lesson to teach this afternoon. And need to get ready for that, so I am going to sign off. Thank you everybody for coming. I hope this week was useful in some way or other, especially today's more practical part. If you have anything that you want me to talk about next week, or the week after that for that matter, get in touch and let me know. I am looking for good ideas. I'm looking for new ideas, and I'd like it to be things people are interested in. So if you have any interest in giving me some guidance on what to talk about in a live stream or make a video of, get in touch through the Walls app or any way you can, smoke signals, whatever you want to do. Get me the word of what you want to talk about, and I'm going to hang around and check the chat one more time before I leave. So if you have an idea, just pop it in there and I'll see it before I go. Thank you everybody for coming. Have a great day. See you next week. Or on